The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
stationed atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized.
It's Thursday, October 4th, Friday, October 5th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, broadcasting to you live from the Great White North on top of the snowy mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR radio network and Deep Talk Radio, and we say hello to each and every one of you. All of our archives, they are free for you to listen to. All you got to do is go to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, if you didn't mind, and hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more new coming for you as well. Tonight's show is brought to you by the YouTube channel Ensuho. Sebastian Martin brings high-quality messages to the masses. Go to spacedoutradio.com, click on the Ensuho banner, and subscribe to the channel today. For centuries, sailors around the world have talked about the legends of mermaids. In folklore, a mermaid is an aquatic creature with the head and upper body of a female human, sometimes male, and the tail of a fish. This creature has been spotted on every continent. However, there really isn't any physical proof that they ever existed. Many scientists believe sailors were actually talking about manatees. However, the sea cow, as pretty as it is in its own right, is much different in looks and not as attractive as the mermaid or merman. To discuss this topic, we bring in author Varla Ventura of varlaventura.net. Here, the quirky, factoid, and lore-obsessed Varla takes a dive into the deep, briny depth of her book called Among the Mermaids, a newly curated collection of classic stories, facts, and tales of mermaids, sirens, selkies, and all manner of fishy business between the seas, or beneath the seas. Then, at the bottom of hour number 3, we get to our news section with Everett Themer and the Encounter Online. Varla Ventura, welcome to Spaced Out Radio. It's been a long, long time since we have had you on this show. You were on the weekend show a long time ago. This is the first time I get to talk to you, and I'm very, very excited about this. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
No, it's absolutely our pleasure as well. And you know what? I do have to give a shout out because one of our Twitter followers at hashtag Spaced Out Radio, Goddess Michelle, she has been bugging me for months to do a show on mermaids. And I had to get the right guest. So I got the right guest, and I hope Goddess Michelle on Twitter is going to be very happy because I know you're listening, Goddess Michelle, all the way in Nova Scotia, Canada. So thank you so much for bringing up the topics. And Varla, let's learn a little bit about you. Did you always have an interest in the mysterious folklores and myths growing up that led you down the path of mermaids?
Yes, I definitely had a childhood that was heavily influenced by fairy tales, folklore, a little witchiness and occult leanings. My mother always had a wide array of books on the shelf, everything from Dion Fortune and Aleister Crowley to the Grimm's fairy tales. And when I was a pretty young kid, we moved to out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we moved sort of off the grid. And so I spent a lot of time reading, especially in the cold winters. And this sort of formed this landscape of mythology and folklore and the possibilities of magic and things of that nature in sort of the background. And I also sort of kept that penchant for those types of things. And as I got, more into the surly teen years and beyond, those things morphed into, sort of a greater array of strange and unusual things.
Growing up like that, where everything was kind of around you, did you feel you had a different childhood than many other people, or did you feel that it was kind of cool to be having such open-minded parents with open-minded literature around?
Well, at the time, I didn't really realize that there was anything different, which is the case most of the time when you're a kid. You don't really realize anything's different until you get older and you start paying attention. But in the community, in the greater area of, outside it's Nevada City, California, there are a lot of artists. And so I would go to a friend's house, but they were painters or, so it wasn't necessarily that they had the same books on the shelf or the same occult leanings as, say, my mom did, but I wasn't exactly being shepherded into, church on Sunday when I went to a friend's house. So I think that also contributed to the idea that, there were these other avenues that I could explore. But again, I didn't really realize that was particularly different or unusual until I was quite a bit older, probably in my, probably really in my early 20s when I started traveling around the world a bit more and learning about more people's backgrounds and their own stories, that I realized that, was actually something quite, of course, you don't really appreciate that sort of thing until you leave it far behind and go exploring and then go, oh, actually, that was pretty cool. And then, of course, at that time, I also started to travel in parts of the country that a lot of these, myths and folklore were coming from, in particular, the Irish fairy tales and the stories of mermaids that come from parts of Ireland and Scotland, and started to hear, individual stories and experiences that weren't in books, but that were being told directly to me. And that really kind of brought me back to those original stories that I remember reading.
Why mermaids? Why go down that path when there's so many different creatures out there that are more popular? Was it the legends, the lore, the mystique around them?
Well, I've gone down other paths as well. So I did kind of simultaneously to writing this. So I was working on a project for the book publisher for Wiser Books, and the project was to find magical creatures, like sort of just this big umbrella of finding stories and myths and legends and lore about magical creatures. And one of the books, Banshees, Werewolves and Vampires, I kind of wrote, not exactly simultaneous, but almost simultaneous to this book, because I was researching magical creatures, and we were supposed to do a book of magical creatures, but there was so much beautiful material about mermaids. And mermaids have such a mystique. I think that people that aren't even the least bit interested in a vampire or even perhaps a ghost will find common ground with a mermaid. That mermaids have this sort of enchantment that go beyond people who are particularly interested in the occult or the supernatural or something magical. They kind of transcend that in many ways, and there's more of a mainstream fetish for them, I guess. And part of that is because there's such a great wealth of wonderful stories and lore that we all kind of grow up with. And of course, being the type of person that I am, the stories I remembered were not particularly pleasant, sweet stories. I actually remember being kind of afraid in a lot of the stories that I read as a kid and not fully understanding them. And so when, something like The Little Mermaid came along, I was pretty aware that was not close to the original version, and that was not exactly the depiction of mermaids that most folklore around the world really depicts as how mermaids behave. I mean, I'm sure they sing and dance to a certain extent, but there was a much more sinister side to mermaids. And then because I went into that rabbit hole, I just kept going and going, and a whole entire book was born out of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's such an intriguing topic because here in North America, we focus on sea monsters, whether it's, even as far as Loch Ness Monster, but we have the Cadborosaurus on the West Coast. There's Ogopogo. There's Champ. There's a number of legends around lakes around North America. We don't really get into the mermaids. We're more focused on things like Dogmen, the Frogmen of Ohio, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, aliens, and ghosts. Do you think that in North America that mermaids are maybe a forgotten species of cryptid that we've overlooked?
Yes, I think that we probably have one or two general ideas of what a mermaid is, and that is based on one version of a mermaid, probably a more a kinder, gentler Anglo version of what a mermaid really is. I think you find them around the world, and in particular, you find them, of course, anywhere you're near the sea. And so it was kind of interesting when I was working on this book. It just happened to be that this mockumentary was coming out about mermaids and whether or not they were real. And it actually included one of the reasons that it kind of confused a lot of people is because it included a lot of real lore and real stories. And so because of that, it sort of created this idea that, the pictures that they were showing were real. And in any case, I think we, our modern society here, we're pretty focused on something like Bigfoot because that's kind of like the legend that we're chasing. And, we forget that there's these wonderful stories from coast to coast that do embody the idea of mermaids or water spirits. There definitely are some accounts of mermaids along the sort of coast of New England. There's a lot of ideas that are kind of similar. It's basically that a man is usually, sorry to say, it's usually a man, and the man is usually enchanted or trapped by a, femme fatale type mermaid creature. which appears to be safe and someone that they would want to be with or rescue. And as a result, they are punished by basically being drowned in the sea unless they happen to live to tell the tale. And then forever, man is warned off from the gnashing, gnarling sea. So I think that we do have those stories here, but we have to dig back a little deeper. And for myself, I just have a tendency to lean toward a lot of the Celtic myths and traditions, and so that's sort of where I began my mermaid journey, and with some stories that I had always loved as a child, and then finding some deeper meaning, and usually finding that the stories were, a little bit depressing. There's something terribly sad, there of a mermaid who's saying that her husband's going to eat all of her babies, and so please, you've got to help me get out, unstuck from these rocks. And so the kind man reaches down and tries to save her, and then is, pulled forever into the briny deep.
Were these just legends back in the 1500s, 1600s? That were going on from sailors around the world, that maybe they had been at sea too long and their mind was playing tricks on them? Or is there actual proof out there that these legends were true?
Well, I do think that, like any legend, I do think there's truth to it. I do think there's a lot of, months at sea, scurvy, dehydration, things like that, never having seen something like a dugong or a manatee before, and sailing uncharted waters and, kind of rubbing your eyes and thinking, well, that looks pretty good. That must have been a mermaid. So of course there's something to that. We have all kinds of accounts of, manatees along the coast, the southern coast of the United States, and that even Blackbeard was said to, order his ship around a certain area that was reputed to have mermaids. Now, if you think of that in a sort of more scientific way, perhaps there were a lot of manatee in that area, and that might indicate that the water was more shallow, and so it wasn't safe to put your ship there. So you can think of it, and you can kind of pull it apart in that way. That being said, I think that we spend a lot of time trying to dismiss some original stories and stories of first peoples that have just, finally kind of come full circle to where now, people are more interested in believing those stories instead of dismissing them as myths or as something that is just a legend. So I think that we have a combination of all of those things mixed in with the great art of storytelling, which is, often an oral tradition. This is the case in, Native North America, certainly, and definitely the case in Ireland. The oral tradition was everything in storytelling. And then somewhere along the line, somebody came along and wrote it down. Well, 9 times out of 10, the person who was traveling and writing these things down and was interested in what, these cultural things was somebody who was a member of the clergy. And so they would then put their own spin on what this legend or lore was. And I found this extensively when I worked on a book about fairies, and you see this over and over again. And even in the book, my book, Among the Mermaids, one of the first stories that I share that is, kind of more of because it's a collection of all kinds of things, people's stories, living mermaids, and of course some old mermaid tales, which I love to include. And there's this story that's set on the Aran Islands off the western coast of Galway, and it's a man named George Birmingham who wrote this story, and he was actually an Irish clergyman. So he has his own kind of, I guess, like Victorian era tinge upon what a mermaid is and whether or not it's real. So when you have something that is, traditionally told orally and is passed down and sort of changes, and then somewhere along the line it gets recorded, we are left with that record. but we don't know what really came before that record or what led to that record. And just as you and I are sharing stories tonight, then somebody may go and retell it, and that may change it. And that's kind of the beautiful art of storytelling. And I think mermaids are a wonderful representation of the power of story in that way, to sort of hook us and enchant us.
But it's also very well known that back in the day, sailors, even today, are extremely superstitious. They don't want to play with anything that could bring any type of bad luck to their vessel. And when it comes to it, they would go to psychics, they would go to mediums and people who would tell the tales of the sea to find out any type of information that they could. So in your belief, Varla, was this a story that kind of got blown out of proportion as you look back at all the facts and research that you have done?
Oh, I think people aren't cautious enough, actually. I think, and time again, you find the one person who knows the most about the mermaid, because this is a really recurring theme and why these stories continue to be told. So there's usually some sort of hag-like woman in the story that is sort of the town witch. And they're the healer. They're the person that everybody turns to when they need help for, everything from their love life to birthing babies. And this is also the person who tends to have the most knowledge of the man, 3 generations ago who actually married a mermaid, because that is another kind of common thread through many different cultures. You'll have this, that man and mermaid can marry. And in some cases, it's something similar to the legend of the Selkie, where if you can get their coat, basically their cloak, and you can hide it, then they can live with you and you can have children and, everything's fine until they discover their coat. And as soon as they discover that, they put it on and they disappear back out to the sea. So I think we probably dismiss it more than we blow it out of proportion. I think we dismiss these things as not being real. And I'll tell you, it's tricky. I think there's a lot of people who believe in many, many things who would not admit that they believe in mermaids. When I wrote the book, I actually put a call out asking for people to share their stories because, I've done collections before, and I always love when someone shares a good ghost story or a firsthand account about a particular place or experience, especially having to do with the supernatural or something kind of magical. And had a hard time finding many people. And then finally I got a couple people to come forward, and at first they wanted to remain relatively anonymous, and then they were willing to let me kind of, I had them approve what I put in the book to make sure they were comfortable with it. But one woman had a full-on aquatic merman sighting, not unlike you would have an alien sighting, where she just woke up and there was this thing with glowing eyes and flowing hair and, 6-pack abs kind of in her room in the Bahamas. I know it sounds horrible, but there you have it. And then another was the story of a woman who's from New Zealand and was an Aboriginal woman from New Zealand, and she told the story of how they have always worked with mermaids. They believe that they were, of mermaids, and that they leave offerings to the mermaids, and that they have this symbiotic relationship where mermaids help them with catching their food and feeding their families, and they in turn are sort of like guardians and stewards of the sea and of that area to protect them. So there's a lot of different perspectives on it, I think. But it is one of those things that, around the world, there are stories that have, very similar themes and very similar descriptions in many ways.
And with that, how much stock do you put in the stories of sailors and seamen around the world, even up to today, who are saying that these encounters are true, and you got to spend a lot of time on the ocean to see these, because this is a story that, for many seamen out there, it just will not go away.
Oh, I put a great deal of stock in that. And I think that's absolutely true, that, it's one thing to kind of play on the beach and think, oh, well, I see a mermaid here. And it's another thing to spend, days and days and days where you don't actually see land. You don't see anyone other than, a crew member. And actually, somebody that I know very closely, she grew up, a good portion of her life, she grew up on a sailboat. And they would kind of moor the boat a lot in Mexico. And after I wrote the book, I think I was on a radio show talking about it, and her mom was listening. And her mom then called us and said, hey, there was a time that we heard mermaids. And what had happened was, the fog had come in, and there were a couple of ships that were kind of, not ships, but everybody kind of had their sailboats around. And the fog was really, really thick, and they all started hearing this noise. And so during that time, if you knew someone was kind of rowing their boat back in, you would bang on a pot or a pan or something like that, just to sort of let people know where you were, because you might not have had lights on the boat, or the fog was so thick it didn't matter. And this wasn't like an area where you had a big lighthouse and big rocks. It was more of just like a harbor. And everyone was hearing this sound. It sounded like a singing. And then later, when the fog cleared and everybody in the community was kind of gathering, nobody could account for what this sound was. And they all believed, this was, 25 years ago, they all believed that this was a mermaid that had kind of felt safe enough to kind of come forward, because the fog was so thick and no one could see them. And then, it's kind of like Bigfoot. It's like everybody wonders why we can't find Bigfoot. And it's like, because you keep shooting at it, stop shooting at it and stop hunting it, and maybe it'll manifest. So I absolutely put a lot of credence in most anything any sailor says, especially when it comes to mermaids. But I also think if you think of the number of different species that, we learn about every day in the ocean, there are so many areas that we haven't explored, and so many unusual and strange creatures that are pulled out of the water, that, there's no reason to think that, the next thing might prove the existence of mermaid, or, our evolution from or toward an aquatic, a more aquatic version of ourselves.
Do you believe they exist or existed in the past, or maybe extinct?
No, I think they're still out there. I just think they are more well hidden. Absolutely. They just, they know we're out to get them. I mean, think about it. The odds are, if someone discovered a mermaid, that mermaid would end up in a glass aquarium, traveling around, being flown to Europe and traveling around in a circus sideshow. So I do think that there are, legends that aren't necessarily true, that it's hard to kind of sift through. And you find that a lot with mermaids really, especially by the Irish definition, really fall under the category of in the fairy kingdom. And so they have a sort of ethereal kind of quality to them that's almost impossible to capture, and that you almost have to be chosen to see them. So it's a little bit of that sort of sighting, that second sight. And so it's not something that just anyone would be able to see. But I think they still exist. I think, I won't give up hope.
Where do you think they are? Now, they have been seen on every continent except Antarctica. And I know even here in British Columbia that the days of Captain George Vancouver, when he was exploring British Columbia for the British monarchy, that he actually claimed, and many of his sailors claimed, that there were mermaids in the Vancouver Island area and to where now is Stanley Park. So much so, the story was so believed that even to this day, there is a bronze statue that has been sitting for, I believe, 60 years of a mermaid on a rock right at Stanley Park.
Right. Well, I mean, I think if you talk about anything that's inland, so anything that's not along the coast, you're going to get into the definition of like some other sort of aquatic kin to mermaids. And I do get into that a little bit in the book. But if I were a mermaid today, where it was most likely, I mean, it's hard to say most likely place. There's certainly the more northern reaches of British Columbia and then up toward Alaska, there's certainly a good chance up there where you have a little less traffic. And the other area I would say is that like the Keppel Islands or down around New Zealand and parts of Australia, that seems like a really likely place to me. Relatively protected, relatively respected, and enough of a hideaway. But I mean, that's a really tricky question because I also think that they still manifest in Ireland, and anywhere where you have, especially island nations, you'll find instances. And to me, one of the interesting. So I honestly, in spite of how I may sound, when I started writing this book just about mermaids, I was thinking this was more going to be just a book of myths, and I wasn't really expecting to be so convinced, in my heart of hearts, that 7-year-old girl inside of me wanted to be convinced that they were real, but I wasn't really expecting it the way that you can believe in ghosts or, even Bigfoot or something like that. But I found time and time again that there were all of these little things that I just couldn't dismiss. And a couple of the things that were of particular interest to me were some sort of, evolutionary tendencies of certain populations that indicated a propensity to be able to live under the sea. And I have two examples. One are the Moken people of Southeast Asia. And they have, they're actually sometimes refer to themselves as sea gypsies, or are referred to as the people of the sea, or sea gypsies. And they have an incredible knowledge of all of the flora and fauna that grow on the island and around in the sea. And the most interesting thing about them is that they spend so much time underwater diving that they actually have extraordinary underwater eyesight. And so over the years, genetically, this incredible underwater eyesight has now become part of their, genetic code that they've then passed on to their children. And so it's actually been shown that the Moken children are born with extraordinary underwater eyesight, and that they actually can see below water just as clearly or better than most people can see above water. So this is something that has adapted for years because of the need to survive and to live off of the land and the environment, and to be able to hunt and to fish and to harvest seaweed and foods and shellfish. And so they've developed this incredible eyesight. But it kind of does just show you that there is this, there's an evolutionary trait that can exist, and this is only over just a few hundred years, or even 2 or 3 generations. It gets better and better and better. The other example that I have are and I'm probably going to say this totally wrong, but the Haneo, who are these women who live in Korea, and they live on the Jeju Islands. And basically, they have for generations and generations practiced this form of free diving. And they we call it skin diving, where you can go down and, kind of hunt for shellfish or whatever. Now, I've personally done a little skin diving off not skinny dipping, skin diving off the coast of Northern California, where it's quite cold, and you wear a 5mm wetsuit and you put weight belts on, and you're not using a scuba tank, you're just diving down. And it's pretty difficult to, stay under for too long. You're limited by your breath. Now the Haneo can go as many as 65 feet, and many of them can hold their breath for 2 to 3 minutes. But there are some of the elders who can hold their breath underwater for this is crazy, as long as 10 minutes, which is an incredibly long period of time to hold your breath underwater. And they have evolved over time this lung capacity. Now, this can be done within one generation. I mean, there are women who are passing this tradition on to their daughters and their granddaughters and their great-granddaughters, teaching them how to be able, the secrets to be able to do this. And I know that this isn't exactly mythology, but it does show sort of the capacity of the human, the human genetic makeup to change and to evolve very quickly to a aquatic or semi-aquatic lifestyle. So it makes sense to me that we could evolve away from that just as quickly, but perhaps get back to it. So start training people.
See, I would totally think that these mermaids or mermen, which I think Ben Stiller did a great job in Zoolander in creating the Legend of the Merman. I mean, how can you not go there in a show like
mermen.
this? Exactly. But I would think that they would be more interested.
Oh, we're going to go there.
Yeah, I think they would be more interested in staying in a warmer climate rather than a northern climate like the Canadian or Alaskan part of the Pacific Ocean, or even the northern part of the Atlantic.
But if that's where you're from, I mean, it's all a matter of I don't think there's one population of mermaids that all run to the Caribbean. I think there are, just as there are different, species or whatever, but, there are Irish Merrow. They're called the Merrow. And actually there are a lot more stories of male mermaids, mermen, Merrow in Ireland than there are probably in most of the other stories and legends that I've read. That's one of the places that they occur more frequently. Not as common as mermaids, of course, but that's often because the story goes that a man marries a woman who is then suspected to be, a Protestant because she won't go to Catholic church, and said that she's a mermaid and and a witch, basically. So those are, it's never a man that's accused of that. There's never like a woman who marries a man and then everybody looks at him sideways and says, oh, he won't come to church on Sunday. He must be a Protestant. That never happens. At least not to my knowledge in any of the stories. I'm not saying it doesn't happen today. I'm just saying, in all the stories, it's usually the woman who is, something's wrong with her. And that is, so that's a whole other, rabbit warren or rabbit hole that we could fall down, because you find that with mythology, you find these recurring themes, and it starts making you think, how does this play into, how we look at relationships today? But personally, if I were a mermaid, I would definitely, just between you and me, I would head south.
So why don't we get into it? What are mermaids? What exactly are they? Are they this Hollywood type creature that, is a woman, a half woman with flailing hair and beautiful eyes and seashells for a bra and, a very tight torso? And then of course, you have the bottom part as one giant fin, or is it something completely different?
There are a lot of variations. I think the most consistent is something along the lines of what you described, sans bra. There's usually no seashell bra in a lot of the earlier accounts. But you do have an enchanting or unworldly beauty, something that would often, just like the sirens in the Odyssey, who were, bird-like, the mermaids make this song, this calling that sort of lures sailors toward them, or someone ambling along the seashore might be enchanted by this sound and then want to follow it. So generally, yes, it's a half sort of humanoid-ish person, and then half fish. Now there's a ton of variations, and I just wanted, like, the marrow is what the Irish refer to as all of the mermaids, male and female. The male marrow are very fierce looking, actually, and you think of, like, perhaps the traditional image of someone like Triton, but imagine it with, like, snarling teeth and sort of a very wolf-like appearance to the face, and claws and things of that nature. So, and even many times the beautiful female is either seen originally or is transformed into some sort of gnarling, horrifying hag. Occasionally you find this image that's reversed, and you see that in a lot of old maps. Sometimes you'll see like a fish head with like feet walking out of it, which is sort of the reverse image of a mermaid. But most of the time you see the torso up is human or human-like, and then the waist down is fish scales. You do have some examples of things like were dolphins and were sharks, which are sort of like partially sort of shape-shifting creatures that come out, during a certain time of the, full moon, or something kind of more akin to the legend of a werewolf, but that take place on, in like an island nation where you wouldn't necessarily have a werewolf legend. You would have something that was of the sea. But generally by and large, you have the image of a beautiful woman and with long hair, and in some tales, the hair is long and black and almost sort of like witchy looking. Not always, red like the Little Mermaid, but, also just sort of very, shiny, supple skin that glimmers in the moonlight. And, a lot of very enchanting attributes, usually well endowed. You also have, now most of the time, the mermaids are trying to get your attention, and then they drown you, basically, or that's kind of what their game is. It's not necessarily like I've set out to harm you. Sometimes it's a oops, I didn't know you could breathe underwater sort of thing going on. But you also do find, and I just have to say this in defense of, I'm always sort of painting this dark picture of mermaids, but they do often help, and there are a lot of stories of them helping sailors to the seashore, to survive a shipwreck, or to guide a ship to away from rocks by making these beautiful sounds. And then you also do have the idea that mermaids worked sort of as psychopomps, or something that accompanies a soul to the other side. And in the case of something like a shipwreck where you have all these lost souls at sea, it was very common to tell the tale of mermaids being the ones that would actually accompany the souls of these sailors to the other side. So in other words, they would sort of protect them instead of them being completely lost at sea. And this was actually used as a means of comforting when, you never, basically they went off to sea and you never saw them again. Mermaids were often accused, but also not necessarily accused in a negative way. Like they could be something that was important to kind of with the whole process of letting go and death. So totally went off on a tangent there. And not
that's all
sure
right.
if I answered your
That's
question.
all right. We allow tangents on this show. We also allow run-on sentences. So it's all good. It's all good. Long paragraphs
I'm
work
in good
too.
company.
But I do want to ask, where did this image for what we know currently as a mermaid come from? Was that just an artistry, or was that Hollywood? How did we get the perception that it is a beautiful young sultress?
Well, one of the earliest mermaid legends, or where kind of the legend of mermaid was born, is from actually an old story from like check the book. I want to say 1000 BC approximately, and it's the story of Astragalus, who was, and this is from Assyria, and basically she loved this man, and she accidentally killed him, and so she was so ashamed that she hid herself in the water, but only turned sort of her lower half into the fish, and the upper half was her own body, and she would come back to sort of see him and visit him. That was one of the very first kind of mermaid depictions, and that's where you see a very beautiful woman with a, beautiful woman's face and body, but, from the waist down, it was all waist down is fish, basically, a big scale. And so I think that there are many early images that are similar to this that our current idea sort of evolved from. In the 80s, we got The Little Mermaid, and we got Daryl Hannah, and we have the Splash, and even prior to that, you have things like Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid, and you have the mermaids of Weeki Wachee who are still performing, which is this wonderful park and springs in Florida where mermaids perform. The women wear these fins and they swim underwater in this tank, and you can sit in this theater and watch them perform. So I think it evolved probably from like an original image, and then it got embellished and changed. And again, I think in Irish folklore, there's a lot of subtleties that in that culture and cultural shifts that were happening. For example, I think there's two stories in my book. One is the mermaid chair. This mermaid chair, it's based in Cornwall. It's still in Cornwall, and it's this beautiful chair that's carved, and it has all these images in it, and it's got mermaid pictures. And the legend is basically that there was a man who married a mermaid, and she wouldn't go to church. And so I kind of mentioned that earlier. There was another one that I also included in the books, very similar, where this man marries this woman, and she's thought to be a mermaid, and the local witch says she's a mermaid, and they go on for generations and generations, and they have all these children, and then he becomes drunk and he starts to beat them, and the children tell, and then the witch tells them what to do, and they go and they get this cloak and give it to her, and then she disappears, and then from there on out, she's thought to be this, these are all the children of the mermaid and the man, and that they do actually have some special powers, like the gift of the second sight and things like that. So I think the idea kind of evolved from all of these. There's just all these like little subtle things, and then just like you have with Dracula and vampires or werewolves, we have our popular culture that comes into play, and that's not to dismiss that. I think that that's built upon things, and then you get one really popular version, and it comes from that. And of course, we always want it to be a beautiful woman. That's more, that's more pleasing. Like, I'm not saying that's the only pleasing thing, but generally in the population, if we can think of it that way, it starts to make it something whimsical and something, more fun, something we can control, rather than something terrifying that's actually lurking in a puddle of, out back. So.
And you never see any ugly mermaids. There's never, I want to see a movie.
Never in a movie, but there are some very, very scary and very horrifying depictions of mermaids in various accounts in folklore, and especially in Ireland. while you just as many stories of beautiful women, you do find that's where you find those sea hags and the things that transform and often what they do is they transform just as, you've gone out to rescue them and their arms are wrapped around you. That's when they transform. So they appear beautiful and then it completely shifts into this, ghastly being, and you're doomed. But what are you going to do? They've got their arms locked around you and the tide's coming in.
Well, I realize that, but, for most literature out there, we don't talk about the sea hags. We talk about Daryl Hannah. We talk about Ariel. And let's face it,
right.
As much as she was a cartoon, how many of us teenagers back in 1989 didn't say, oh, why couldn't she be real?
Under the sea. Well, and the interesting thing is, I may be one of the few children that was slightly, first of all, I'm going to age myself here and say I wasn't a child when it came out, so that's part of it. But having read and had the Little Mermaid story itself read to me at a very young age, and never, in fact, being haunted by that story, because if you've ever read the Hans Christian Andersen version, which is what the Little Mermaid is based on, the Disney version. And it's the same basic plot, she wants to become mortal so she can be with the prince and all of that. But the little details that are in there, and the thing that always haunted me the most is that it's something like, he says, every step that she takes on dry land are like daggers in her feet, and that she walks, and when she walks the length of a beach, her feet are actually bleeding because it's so painful for her to be on land. And I never forgot that. And then I remember thinking, where's that part? And, just naively thinking that part somehow is going to make its way into the movie. Now, of course, it's not, right? I mean, it's a movie for like 10 and under. So you don't want like this, you don't want to show bloody feet, right? That this doesn't seem appropriate. So I think that there's that sort of idea that, kind of made it nice that even the, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't quite as perfect and playful. But that's not the popular culture. When you talk about popular culture, you've got, and then think about just like, if you swim all the time and you live on like seafood and seaweed, this sort of rich diet, then you're going to have shiny hair. You're going to have like ripped abs because you're always swimming. So it makes sense, really, like if you think about it in a physiological way, that a mermaid would be beautiful. I'm not trying to dash anyone's hopes out there that mermaids aren't beautiful.
We're going to get to a lot of questions in hour number 2 because they are starting to pile up. And if you have questions, I will read them to Varla. So make sure you put them in capital letters if you're in one of our plethora of chat rooms or on Twitter. But I have one that I do want to ask here. So we've got about 4 minutes before we have to go to break. And that is about the Starbucks logo. There seems to be an entire controversy about the mermaid and the way she's sitting with her legs and everything. And I've had a couple people ask about that. What are your thoughts about the Starbucks logo?
Well, they say that they took it from an old woodcut. That's what they say, that it's an old woodcut. And if that's the case, I think you'd probably be able to find something kind of similar if you were digging around. And it does have that nice kind of like woodcut look. But I guess the question is her tail split, right? That's kind of like the big thing. It's like, well, if she's a mermaid, why can you? And I think that, I don't know this because I haven't done a great deal of studying of the Starbucks logo specifically. But when I look at it, I think artistically, if I were trying to depict that was a mermaid and I only had a circle to do it in, and I would have to split. I would have to do something with the tail. And so the idea that it was kind of a split makes it almost like, now there are actual depictions of mermaids that instead of one solid tail, you have 2 feet and each foot is kind of like a tail. There are depictions of mermaids like that in, just very, very old art. not so much in the Assyrian, because I think that's all one singular depiction, but there are some images. Excuse me, I'm going to cough a tiny bit there. Sorry. I need a nice tea from Starbucks. But you do see that in art a little bit. So perhaps they took their liberties with that. I'm not sure if I can really resolve the urban controversy over that. But I will say that by and large, mermaids are depicted with one solitary fin. There are occasionally images of two fins side by side in place of the legs. And those are legends that tend to kind of, lean more toward the idea that we evolved from that mermaids and mankind are closer than they are apart. In other words, that we have legs, we've just shed our scales off of our legs.
It is kind of weird because there's a lot of people who believe it is linked to the Illuminati, a lot of people who think it's linked to some sort of shadow group, and the logo has some sort of conspiracy towards it. I'm not sure about that.
It's got a money drawing element stuck in there somewhere for sure. Somebody did, if that, whether it was on purpose or just a genius marketing act, it's definitely got a money spell in there because it worked. I mean, we all recognize that symbol. We've all shelled out money to that symbol. Most of us anyway.
That's why I'm glad I don't drink coffee. Saves me a ton of money. Saves me a ton of money. Varla, you hold on here for a second because we are going to step out for our first break of the night. Varla Ventura is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. She writes about everything weird and strange. We're talking mermaids tonight. Maybe a little bit later in the show, we'll get into some of her stranger encounters. Banshees, werewolves, vampires, fairies, pukas, changelings. Sounds very interesting. We might have to bring this young lady back. We just might. There's too much to talk about. We're talking mermaids here and merman. Coming up on Space Out Radio in hour number 2.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm going to take you for a ride every Sunday night on Spaced Out Sundays. I'm going to set up your week with some strange tales from across North America, from psychic readings, Sasquatch, UFOs, to the most haunted locations. Come join me at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and let's get weird together. I'd love for you to join me. Spaced Out Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the program, our Keith Andrews is back for another edition of the ET Connection. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. We say hello to everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. Don't forget, all of our archives are free on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Hamadryad. Hamadryad is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Tonight we are talking mermaids. Author Varla Ventura has a great book. You can go, and I know a couple of our listeners already have gone and purchased the book, so that'll be good news for our guest tonight, Varla Ventura. But her book, which I highly suggest you get if you're into this field, is Among the Mermaids. You can get it online, on Google, Amazon, all over the place. And her website, varlaventura.net. So we welcome her back. Varla, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Second hour. Here we go.
Before we get too far more into mermaids, I do want to ask a question. Like, looking at your website, and I read it off right before the break, you deal with a lot of the strange creatures: banshees, werewolves, vampires, fairies, pukas, changelings, and so much more. I like the fact that you are dealing with these cryptid-type creatures outside of Dogman and Bigfoot, because a lot of people always ask, what about the other ones? Because all we ever hear is Sasquatch, all we ever hear is Dogman, and that's where everybody seems to be concentrating their investigations. Why do you go with the lesser folklore?
Well, I think that it's what I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to something that is, a little more obscure, a little lesser known. I think, people ask me about Bigfoot, and they ask me about Dogman, and, I know the basics. I don't know much more than the average person. I definitely know less than the average person probably listening tonight about Bigfoot and Dogman. While I find them interesting and would love to sit around a campfire and hear the stories, that's not where my heart lies. My heart lies with the pukas and the changelings and the banshees and the sort of wicked little fairies out there. So I think that one leads to another, even with mermaids. And I had kind of mentioned this before, that when I started, I was actually researching a different book and kept coming up with there was just all of these mermaid stories that surprised me and delighted me and took me down a sort of more of a path of folklore and dark legends than I had initially expected. And so it merited its own book. But I also discovered all of these authors I didn't know about who wrote about fairies and had encounters with changelings and pukas and all these different sort of creatures. So I had the book Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires. I actually had to, I don't want to say argue, because I get along really well with my publisher, but they knew this was the peak Twilight phase when this book was coming out, and they really wanted why don't we have vampires first? It should be vampires, or it should be werewolves first. And please, for the love of God, we're going to be one of 700 books that are going to come out on vampire lore. It's the banshees no one's writing about. Please let us lead with banshees. And so we did. We led with banshees. And they didn't exactly take off, but I'm still waiting. But I still find it to be... Now, I find vampires interesting, and I find werewolves very interesting. And I think there's some crossover with werewolves and Dogman and Bigfoot. There are some sort of legends that straddle something very similar to those. but it was the banshees that really hooked me, and they are born from the same environment that a lot of the mermaid stories I was very attracted to are from, and that is some like very early, very dark Irish folklore.
I want to read this comment from Goddess Michelle on Twitter at hashtag Spaced
Yay,
Out
Goddess
Radio.
Michelle!
Yes, she's the one who actually requested this topic. So we got to give her props for
Awesome.
that. She says,
"Thank you.
My ex's father, who was a fisherman, started carving mermaids in his later years. He told my kids that they were real. He and others seen them. His father showed him, then as a boy, and told him never to go near, and if a net comes up with a mermaid in it, to cut the net." I mean, this is how serious seamen around the world have taken this topic.
Yeah, and there's a mix of sort of reverence and respect for the mermaids, but also a healthy dose of fear there, and that is well placed. That fear should remain there. Now, you can take that back in a whole other direction to say, we told people to stay out of the bog. There's bog monster. Well, you don't want kids playing in the bog because they could sink down. You could say it's the same thing with mermaids. And I see that sort of as it's almost an anthropologist way of explaining old stories. Oh, well, there was a practical reason for it. There was a scientific reason for it. But I think that when you have, a sailor, or as I had said earlier, my friend who lived on a sailboat, you have these experiences, and her mother said the same thing. Mermaids are very real, and that they can be dangerous. Now, I also think that they can be helpful, and there are instances in which they've helped small craft kind of guide their way. But I think that we are so quick to dismiss them as real. And I think you have people who believe in ghosts. They might even believe in fairies. They might believe in Bigfoot. But if you ask them if they believe in mermaids, they sort of are like, no, those aren't real. People won't admit it. Although I think that they are more popular in sort of a popular culture kind of way.
Well, I really do believe that there has to be something to this. People are seeing them. And, knowing where Goddess Michelle lives in Nova Scotia, which, by the way...
Oh, that's right. She's in Nova Scotia.
Which, by the way, today is the 51st anniversary of the Shag Harbor UFO incident in Nova Scotia, which is kind of cool. We tend to see, or we tend to write these topics off that, as we talked in hour number one, that, sailors around the world, whether they're male or female, really doesn't matter, really, really do believe that these creatures exist, especially with cutting nets and everything along those lines. If you catch a mermaid, is there any reports of fishermen actually catching a mermaid in their nets?
Well, one thing that actually came up a few times when I was researching mermaids was the practice of, like, if you find a spear in your net, if for some reason you found a spear in your net, you should cut the whole net and let it all go, because it actually meant that the fish were battling a mermaid and trying to kill off a mermaid. This was like an old kind of legend. And yes, there were often cases of mermaids getting tangled in. I think more often it was something a little closer to the shore where a mermaid would be like, I don't want to say grounded, but like kind of stuck because of low tide. So they're stuck in a tide pool. And then a fisherman or someone who is down by the sea checking their traps would then sort of get sucked into oh, come and save me. I'm stuck in this place. I can't, because they can't walk, right? They can only swim. And so he goes and he lifts her up, and I'll go a little further, just out a couple more feet. And then, the tide's rushing in and the undertow is pulling him out. But there's a lot of stories of fishermen seeing things, catching something that doesn't look right. And actually some of there are some things like I think it's the skate that, its skeleton looks very mermaid-like. It kind of doesn't, it almost looks like it has kind of like, leggy type things versus having a fin. And so those are actually even thought to have magical powers. The bones of those are used to be able to gain the second sight and be able to see. I'm not suggesting that people go out and harvest and dry skates by any means. Full disclaimer. But I think you have a lot of things that were caught that were also kind of, what the heck is this? And to this day, we still have that, right? Like sort of a head scratcher that washes up on a beach, or, we can't quite explain what this thing is, or it looks a lot like, maybe it was a whale, but the way it's morphed, it could have actually had a human head. And then the most famous instance of somebody catching a mermaid is really was the P.T. Barnum mermaid that was totally made up. He sewed part of an animal onto a fish scale and told everyone that he had found this mer creature, and charged 50 cents a person to come into this tent and look at this strange thing. And of course it was completely, a total scam. So that's the most probably famous instance of something being caught. And because of things like that, in fact, any time that happens, there's that takes away from the credibility of the real stories out there and the real instances that happen. And again, like I said, that I put out a call for, share your mermaid stories. Well, people had no idea who I was asking for mermaid stories. But I have noticed that since then, I have gotten more people talking to me about experiences that they've had. And often they are people who lived at sea for a time, or are, descendants from fishermen, or, grew up in a coastal community somewhere around the world. And so I have gotten more and more stories over the years of people who have had these authentic experiences, and who, for good reason have, procedures in place to avoid being drowned by a mermaid.
I find it just fascinating. I really, really do. I find it completely fascinating. I mean, so much folklore, so much storytelling. I mean, we have a hard enough time as people believing the legends and the lore that First Nations have told over thousands of years. And yet,
right,
when it comes to mermaids, we almost have that same lack of respect or credibility for the story when it comes to sailors and mermaids.
Yeah, 100%. And, we will spend probably the next 30 to 50 to 100 years scientifically trying to prove what First Peoples have been telling us all along in regards to mermaids and many, many other things. So that's absolutely true. And I think that in a modern way, we tend to look at something as being myth, and then we immediately equate that with a falsehood. And that's not always, those definitions are not always the same thing. That a myth, just because it isn't something that you can prove with a fact that's right in front of you, there's a difference between a myth and a lie. And that the myths have, a very, very important place in our, not just in our world culturally, but also in our ability to accept and believe in things that are beyond our scope of understanding. And the further we get away from that ability to accept something that is not concrete right in front of us, the harder it is for us to enjoy some, we do it with television, or binge watching something, or we read something. When we are lost in that story, something actually happens to us in our brains. There's something that is changing and shifting, and it allows us to become more open-minded. And I'm not just talking about being open-minded about whether or not mermaids are real, but it allows this suspension of belief long enough, or suspension of disbelief long enough, to create something that sort of innately allows us to be more open-minded in general in our lives, and we're open more to the power of wonder and the power of change, and that sort of thing that we lose for that children still children have. And that is the power of myth and the power of any of these kind of stories. It's not always about if this is real or not real. It's about what it actually does for us as a society and as a people, and being able to believe and understand that there's something that we don't understand and that it's different than us, but we can still accept it. So that's the end of my rant on the fine art of storytelling and its importance in society today.
Not a problem. I want to get to a question. I want to get to a question from Kevin, who is asking, how come all mermaids seem to be very Anglo, Varla? Are there Hispanic, Asian, African, or even Indian mermaids?
Absolutely. Actually, and it's interesting that this person is asking this. It's a common question. And I think that I actually had a discussion online with someone fairly recently. And I think that what happens is a lot of the stories, and I am completely, like I said, I admitted that I lean toward the Irish folklore as sort of like my core base. That's just what I'm interested in, and that's sort of what my core base is. But that does not, and that is, of course you have pale mermaids there, but they're often actually very different than what we imagine with like the red hair, and they usually have straight dark hair, and they look a lot sort of more menacing and witchy. But absolutely, there are lots and lots of mermaids around the world and mermaid depictions. You have Afro-Caribbean mermaids. You have mermaids from, Central America. There are all kinds of depictions of mermaids. I think because of popular culture and because of what we think of, in terms of like, we're talking about Splash or The Little Mermaid or things that kind of automatically come to mind. We think of like this pale skinned mermaid, which is absolutely not the case at all. And if you even think about it, it doesn't make sense that all mermaids would look like that. That's just sort of the most common imagery that we see. But throughout the world, there are stories of mermaids of all varying skin tones, varying degrees of beauty and endowment, and all manner of, some are frightening and some are enchanting, and some have, shorter hair and some have long flowing hair. Often the long flowing hair comes from the ability to sort of hide amongst the kelp or the seaweed. So you and I think that you have these camouflage elements that keep the mermaids from being visible at all times, like, the way you can't always see an octopus or something like that, because they are aquatic creatures. But absolutely, I mean, I just think it comes down to, and even the cover of my book, that's actually taken from an ad, an old Victorian hair tonic ad. And so those mermaids, of course, are very Anglo because it's very Victorian. And it's like Queen Victoria's reign of Angloism across the world at the time. That's why we call it the Victorian era. So that's, you see that a lot in art as well. You have like John William Waterhouse, and he always painted these very pale, red-haired mermaids of legend.
Michael is asking, have there been any recent modern accounts of mermaids being found or sighted?
So I don't know, most like recent in the last year or so. I can only go on, I'm sure there's stuff on the internet, but I can only go on a couple of experiences that people have shared with me. And so by that, I would say yes. I did have somebody tell me a story not that long ago that was, I think I had mentioned earlier that there was a woman who had sent a story in about seeing this creature in the Bahamas. That was a few years back. since then, I have had 2 different people who have emailed me somewhat similar stories. That woman also sent me a picture of what was a drawing. It wasn't an actual photograph. It was a drawing of what she recalled seeing. And I've had a couple of other people who have shared a very similar story to being somewhere, basically, you know, in one of those kind of cabanas. Now, she was in somewhere in the Bahamas. One of the stories came from the Yucatan Peninsula, and being in one of those kind of like cabanas that kind of go out over the sea, and seeing something not in the room, but waking up at night in that kind of weird way where you're like, why am I awake? And looking out and seeing something kind of like up out of the water staring back at her. And it had a very, again, that one was also male. And it had, she didn't describe it as being frightening, but it didn't look very welcoming. It was sort of one of those things where like she caught it and it caught her. Like it was looking at her, she was looking at him. And it was sort of, but in the same way as the first account that the woman had sent me, it's sort of, you know, glowing eyes, and reddish hair and, you know, just silvery skin, but it was in the moonlight. So that I can only go on that. Now, I haven't done a lot of research on mermaids in the last couple of months to see if there's anything new that's coming up. It's very hard to sift through what is real and what is totally made up, because, you know, there are plenty of P.T. Barnums out there to this day. And then you had that Mermaid, the Body Revealed, which confused the heck out of people because it just said in the very beginning of that mockumentary that it was a mockumentary. But if you happen to come in halfway, you know, people are like, what's going on? And I remember I was working on the book at the time, and my mom called me up and she's like, do you know there's a documentary on about mermaids? And I was like, Ma, that's not real. I mean, it's got real mythology in it, but that's the, you know, the picture of the mermaid in Iran is like, that's, they do think there's a mermaid in that harbor, and there is a contest. If anyone can provide proof, they get like $1 million or something. But there is actually that image that's in that documentary of this mermaid laid out is spotted on this rock is totally inaccurate. You know, it's totally a reenactment. So that caused a lot of confusion too, and kind of it did mermaids a disservice on one hand, but on the other hand, you know, a lot more people were looking for mermaids. So, you know, the interest kind of peaked.
I love this question from Adnome. And he is asking, if you catch a mermaid and eat it, is that considered cannibalism?
That would be very, very wrong. First of all, if you catch a mermaid, why would you eat it? You would need to put that on display and charge 50 cents a pop for it, or you know.
I understand, but you're also talking about a guy who is addicted to garden gnomes.
Oh, I have a fair fetish for garden gnomes. I can respect that.
Oh. I'm trying to get over my fear of garden gnomes.
You're afraid of them?
Yes.
You're really?
Yes. All right.
I'm not. I don't mean to laugh. I don't mean to laugh. I'm sorry.
And trust me, those things, I've called them some pretty nasty names. But this past weekend, I was hanging out with David Weatherly. And from, you know, he's looked into garden gnomes and researched them, seen them, and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, Dave, you got to get over this fear. And he's like, they are all vengeful. If you're mean to them, they will be mean back. So he gave me a lecture.
That's not helping your fear.
Well, so now I have to promote the love of the garden gnome. And I said, dude, you're pulling my leg. And he's like, no, actually, I'm not. And he told me a couple of freaky stories that he investigated. And it all came down to you know, being polite and cheery with the garden gnome. Be one with the garden gnome. So now I am one with the gnome.
Don't you think they know falseness now? Don't you think they can detect your false, like, underlying fear? Or do they not mind?
I am trying hard.
I'm not helping.
I am trying very, very hard. Very, very hard. Let's get to another question here. This one comes from Bill, who is asking, how many mermaids have been captured and studied? Do we know of any?
No, zero. I think any ones that have been captured, I don't think that anyone who has captured or had an encounter with a mermaid has, dissected it or studied it. And if you do see instances of that, they're not. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say they're made up, because I think that when somebody like your example of the of Michelle in Nova Scotia, who Goddess Michelle, sorry, I'll correct myself, who mentioned, the practice of the fishermen. Anytime, there's a reverence there, right? So there's a reverence, and there's an understanding, and there's a respect. And so because of that, you're not going to find a lot of, let's just pick this thing apart. I suppose that at some point, it's entirely possible that, a Nautilus exploration could bring back a mermaid and dissect it. They would probably be laughed off the, Scientific American floor or whatever. So there's this kind of, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, and you really ought not to dissect something like that. So to my knowledge, anything like that, falls in the category of P.T. Barnum. And, you're dealing with a magical creature. I mean, that's just the facts. You're dealing with a magical creature. And when you deal with magical creatures, just like with garden gnomes, there's certain things that you can't control and that you'll never be able to prove. And that's what makes them magical. That's what keeps them on the periphery of regular things like you and me.
There have been so-called skeletons that have been found on beaches that are dried out. And for the most part,
I think those are all fake.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that, but there have been on YouTube, and I'm saying this to everybody. You have to watch YouTube videos with many grains of salt. And maybe some lime, just in case your eyes see something that they shouldn't. So that way you just squeeze the
some tequila to wash that down.
Exactly. But is there any evidence that you have seen on video that has really made you think, we may have something here?
No, I've never seen any video that has convinced me, and I go the same thing with Loch Ness Monster. I completely 100% believe in the Loch Ness Monster. I've never seen a video that has really. I watched them all, maybe, but I've never seen anything that's actually provided that definitive proof. And with mermaids, no, I have seen. Yeah, no, I've never seen a video that's made me think that I'm such a skeptic. I know it sounds ridiculous from someone who wrote a whole book about mermaids, but when you are diving into that research, and you're pulling from all these sources, you actually learn pretty quickly how to tell. I mean, I'm sure there's things I've been totally suckered into, but you do learn to tell the things that are sensationalized and made up from the things that are legitimate. And I personally have never seen a video that I think provides any proof. That doesn't mean it's not out there.
What about the videos? I mean, you see some of those videos where people are swimming and then all of a sudden their camera catches what looks to be a mermaid, off in the distance. Now, easily recreated. I understand that. I'm not trying to say that I believe in that stuff, but, as I've looked at videos, there's been a couple that I've kind of questioned. Like, that looks way too real to be faked.
Yeah, I haven't seen any like that, but I do not spend a lot of time on the internet looking at. I'm not saying that you do, but I mean, so if people want to send them my way, I'd be happy to look at them and review them. I also have been sent numerous images of fairies and strange images, and I have seen some very convincing photographs, not like the Cottingley fairies, but some very strange things caught on like one of those motion cams on someone's property that they just keep for hunting and things of that nature. Some very odd things. And same with, ghosts and paranormal. But as far as mermaids go, I have never seen a video that has convinced me that that person has captured something. But I haven't seen them all. I didn't, I wrote the book a few years ago, and I did not at the time rely on video footage. And one of the reasons is that at that same time I was writing the book, this mockumentary, which was called Mermaids, The Body Revealed, had come out. And so their footage is very convincing. And I realized that I had to be super careful to not take in too much of anything that, had been rebranded as somebody else's out there on the internet that was actually created for that film. And then there was a subsequent film. So I'm super, super careful and just a little bit jaded about those things being legitimate. But say I'm jaded, but I'm also extremely open-minded to the existence of mermaids and would welcome something that would really make me a video that would really convince me that somebody actually caught it. I'm not saying that I don't think they're real. I'm saying I find it highly unlikely that there's video footage of it at this point.
Trip is asking, when the mermaids are swimming, do you think that they're able to see underwater because maybe they have one of those invisible eyelids, much like sharks do, for protection when they attack?
I think it's more like the Moken that we spoke of a little bit earlier, who basically can see underwater without any kind of eye protection, and they have like the same kind of human eyes like you and I have, and that it's just an evolutionary trait to be able to see underwater. I think that modern Moken may use goggles now, but I'm not 100% sure on that. That I have seen video footage of these children swimming underwater and being able to see, and the optometrist giving them like the eye test that you get when you go to the eye doctor, doing it underwater, and the children being able to identify, shapes and from further away than most children can see, than beyond 2020. So I forgot what the original question was, but
about the eyelids.
I think it's more likely that they have eyes like us, and they have the evolution to see underwater. That's my belief, and that we kind of went a separate way and started, seeing on land.
Joe is asking, are mermaids more fish or more human?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think if you had to pick one, I would probably pick human. But I don't think they're human. I think they're more of a supernatural. I think that they probably have more human qualities than they do just fish qualities in terms of their, whatever their, social culture is like. But I think just like initially when I think of mermaids, I think of them as being something more akin to the human race, but just a little bit different. It's like the flip side, the Atlantis, the other part of us that, when we're swimming underwater, we believe we are. That's kind of the category I put them in.
What do they eat? Fish?
Well, they're probably rich in omega-3s, a diet rich in omega-3s, fish, shellfish, seaweed, sea plants. That would be my guess. And that's you're going to live a long time. So I get asked also like about the longevity, like how can, are they immortal? And I don't think they're immortal, but I think that they have a lifestyle that as long as they're not caught by a fisherman and as long as they're not poisoned or, eat some kind of weird plastic thing from the ocean, that because of that diet and because of that lifestyle of swimming, and two things that are like really good for your body are like swimming and like eating, having a diet high in omega-3s, right? So those two things alone would indicate that there's longevity amongst the mermaids.
BTO is asking, Do you think mermaids or mermen are indigenous, part of the hybridization program, and or potentially extraterrestrial?
So I initially always believed that they're indigenous, and I still maintain that. However, I will say that the drawing that the woman sent me after she described her mermaid encounter, when I saw that drawing, it reminded me so much of sketches of extraterrestrial encounters that it did put this little kind of seed in the back of my head of, are these actually, and I know people believe this, but for me, I always thought of them as more indigenous and predating us in many ways in our own consciousness. But there was this little seed in there of them being more off-planet, basically. And I never had even considered that until I saw this woman's drawing, and I just thought, oh, man, that just looks so much like a sketch that somebody does after, they come back from an abduction, and the best drawing they can do is this little sketch of like something with these, and it was the eyes really that kind of did it. So it just put this kind of seed in my mind that they might be from, some other planet.
Very interesting. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we're still trying to figure out where the octopus came from.
They came from nowhere. They were here before us, and they shall outlive us all.
You are so skeptical.
The mighty cephalopod.
Come on, where is your tinfoil? Where is your tinfoil?
The mighty cephalopod will rule one day, you see. We will be bowing to it. Probably, would do a better job in the office in the United States than the current president. So,
and
cephalopod for president.
Hey, up here we have to call mermaids and mermen merpeople.
You can call them Murrow if it makes you feel any better.
Yeah, you don't know our prime minister. You don't know our prime minister. Merpeople.
I guarantee you it's not as bad.
We
not
could,
as bad
we
up
could,
there, trust me.
Well, put it this way. Both of us have extremes. And somewhere one day we'll find the middle again.
We'll find the middle ground.
Let's
Maybe
go to Joe's question.
Country.
Let's go to Joe's question here. He is asking about the legend of Laura Lee. Is she a mermaid or a siren?
So I think we're talking about one of the Lorelei that I am, Lee or Lorelei, that I'm most familiar with is an aquatic creature. She's often called a siren, but sirens, by kind of loose definition, have more of a bird-like quality, whereas she has she's more of a water nymph. And one of the most famous stories about her is that she lives in the Seine River that flows through Paris. And her voice can be heard, if you're walking by the river late at night, you can hear this Lorelei. So very similar to mermaids, but more often found in fresh water. That's kind of like my basic understanding. And I think I actually included in the book one of the versions of the Lorelei in the Seine River, an older story that I had never read before, and I found it very beautifully written and wanted to include it because I thought that was important in the kind of canon of mermaids. I include certain aquatic creatures that are akin to mermaids.
Interesting. Angel is asking, do you feel mermaids are only ocean dwelling? Are they found in lakes or rivers, streams?
So that's the perfect next question, because generally speaking, mermaids kind of by like loose mythological definition, mermaids appear in usually in the sea, in large bodies of water. Now, there are also very mermaid-like creatures that appear in lakes, rivers, streams, just as we have, sea monsters. We also have lake monsters, and so in that same manner, we have very similar versions of something like a mermaid that might appear in a lake or a boat, or a body of water. So you have naiads, which appear in like wells and more like natural streams. You have nymphs that are often spotted in lakes and ponds. You have something like the Lorelei, which is in a river, and then you have mermaids, which are most often seen in the sea, the larger bodies of water and the sea. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not some crossover, and sometimes you've got saltwater nymphs, and occasionally you might have a freshwater mermaid. But generally speaking, it's mermaids is almost an umbrella term, really, for these sort of aquatic, semi-humanoid creatures that are of myth and legend, and that people have encountered, and everybody kind of has a slightly different name or variation on what that is. We commonly call it a mermaid, just like we commonly call things a fairy, but there are all these subcategories of fairies. There's pukas, there's changelings, there's hobgoblins, there's trolls, there's gnomes. There's all these different things that fall under the kingdom of fairies.
Love them gnomes.
Sorry to bring the
gnomes
back in.
I am
There's
one
so
with the gnomes.
There's so much to say about gnomes. I feel that we might want to consider having a more holiday-themed discussion about the Scandinavian troll and some of the sort of slightly more sinister practices of gnomes during the holiday time. But that would be for a whole other discussion.
Oh, we can do that. We can definitely arrange that. Totally arrange that. That's not a problem.
Your doors, though.
I am one with the gnomes.
Right now.
That is my new saying. I am one with the gnomes.
You chilling with your gnomies? Yeah.
Trying. Very much trying. I love this question from Adnome. He's asking, if a mermaid sees a hot tub, does she get sad because Uncle Charlie was a lobster?
No, because mermaids are not related to lobsters. Lobsters are horrible, bottom-feeding, bottom of the food chain dwellers. So she doesn't feel sorry for lobsters at all.
Yeah.
I feel about lobsters the way you feel about gnomes, or felt about gnomes.
How? Lobsters are delicious.
They're so gross.
They're delicious.
No, mermaids like hot tubs. It's just you saw Splash, right? Or you saw Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid, which was the 1940s version where this man's on. He's on his honeymoon. Of course, he's on his honeymoon with his beautiful bride somewhere in the Bahamas, and he sees this mermaid, and he decides to catch her and bring her back to their honeymoon suite. But he's trying to hide her from his bride, so he keeps her in the bathtub, and then he has to figure out a way to get her back home. And it's basically Splash is based on this story of Mr. Peabody and the Mermaid. It's completely ridiculous, but also wonderful.
I'm now getting requests to talk about trolls and gnomes. Thank you, Varla. Appreciate that, Varla.
Sorry.
Real loving
actually,
of you.
What I have to say, and I'm not going to say it now because we're staying on topic more or less, but what I have to say might make you feel better, and I might have a solution for you.
Let's do it the next half hour. How about that?
Okay.
We can do that. We can totally do that.
We can do that. We can totally segue into trolls and gnomes.
Exactly. Boo Boo is asking, do all mermaids communicate with the same language? And I'll throw something in there. Do they understand English?
Well, I would suspect that mermaids, like any culture, have different language. But mermaids communicate through sound and through sort of that the songs, and I think probably a lot of echolocation. So I I think that I don't think mermaids like all get together. There's not there is an actual mermaid convention, like in the United States. There's a couple of mermaid conventions, MerCon and such, in which mermaid performers get together and they judge on who's the best mermaid performer and who can stay underwater the longest and all kinds of wonderful things. That being said, when we're talking about mermaids themselves, not people impersonating mermaids, I don't think like all mermaids like get together once a year and talk. I think that they sort of stick to their part of the world. They're you're an Irish marrow, or you're hanging out in the Caribbean. I mean, you're not going to swim all that way. I don't really see it like that. I think that that's more of a human way of viewing something that doesn't really exist. So I don't think that all mermaids like get together and start talking. However, I do think there is one universal language. We all know it, and it's the language of music. And I think that applies to mermaids, especially because they are always equated with sounds and beautiful songs, sometimes to lure and sometimes to lure you away and protect you from craggy rocks and such, and sometimes to get you closer to the craggy rocks, depending on their mood.
Very neat. Very, very neat. What's the difference between a siren and a mermaid?
So the sirens, like the sirens from, I guess we probably all think of the sirens from the Odyssey, right? That's our most, So they have a lot of crossover because they would often appear, as they do in the Odyssey, they sort of appear on like the entryway to this bay, right? They're kind of perched on either side of this sort of water canal or whatever, where to kind of guide the ship. And as you're passing through, you had to pass through to get to this next place. You had to make sure that you didn't crash. And then these sirens are calling out to you and trying to get you to like look this way and steer the ship the wrong way. So mainly is that they, in that way, they're very similar to mermaids because they have that ability. But the main difference is that they're more bird-like. Mermaids are always part fish, and sirens can be part fish and part bird, but generally are part bird. And they're usually, so mermaids are part human and part fish, for better way, lack of explaining it any better way. And then sirens are sometimes considered to be mermaids, sometimes depicted as being, a human face with a fish tail and wings. But mermaids are really never depicted with wings, and sirens are almost always depicted with wings. But they do tend to hang near bodies of water because they're kind of there to give out their song and attract sailors. And they have a lot of the same, agenda as mermaids quite frequently, actually, to, kind of get in with the sailors and lure them one way or another.
Can a mermaid also be a sea hag?
Yes. In fact, among the Irish Marrow, there are many sea hags. And I had mentioned very earlier that there are often situations in which something that looks beautiful turns hag-like right before it's dragging you under the water. And there are many accounts of something like that. It's actually quite similar to the Irish Banshee, which you would see sometimes appearing as this, either a helpless old lady or a beautiful woman that then turns into this like wicked, wretched thing, right as you kind of get face to face with it.
Weird. That sounds freaky. Just freaky.
Super freaky.
I remember getting freaked out by, remember on the old Popeye cartoons when he used to have to battle the sea hag?
The sea hag.
Oh, that scared me as a kid. She just scared me.
I think like that's kind of the maybe like my point in writing the book was to shed some light on the idea that, we have this like very, calypso dancing mermaid version in modern times. And that's very modern times. That's like the last, 50, 60, 70 years or so. Prior to that, mermaids were feared for good reason. And there, many of the stories about them are either heart-wrenching because, a family was sort of torn apart because the mermaid was just, was discovered to be a mermaid, or someone they loved was drowned, or they're just very fearsome. There's a lot of fear involved. And it has nothing to do with their appearance, because their appearance is usually very, they are usually very appealing. There's a beautiful story that I love, and it's by T. Croft and Croker. And I won't tell the whole story because I know we're kind of getting to the top of the hour. But,
yeah, we got about 90 seconds. 90 seconds.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite authors, but there's a beautiful story about a woman who was always reported to have been a mermaid, but no one could ever prove it. And then this guy gets drunk down by the sea, and he sees these beautiful white kind of creatures come out of the sea and pull the coffin away, and it's called Florrie Cantillion's Funeral. And it's a beautiful story, and it kind of talks about how she lived her whole life as a mortal, but eventually she was returned to the sea by her sea people. Quite lovely.
So how do they transition? Is it just, do they have magical powers?
In this case, it was like she had chosen to stay and be among the people, but it was always reputed that her family at one point had essentially mated with a mermaid. And so what comes out of the sea and takes her was basically the equivalent of like a sea ghost. The way it's described, it's not a mermaid. It's not a bunch of mer people. It's these sort of entities that would be like, something we would think of as a ghost of a human. And they came out of the sea and pulled the coffin down into the water and took it away. And it's, of course, all told from the point of view of a man drinking whiskey on a beach. So it can be refuted later on, of course.
Man drinking whiskey on the beach usually ends up with a sight of a Speedo around, too.
Something happens.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. We don't recommend that for anybody. We really, really don't.
No.
Oh, trust me. The lakes around here in summertime, I don't even go to them because there's a lot of German folk who come here and they all wear the tight
You're gonna,
Speedos.
look down. You're just looking down.
No, I'm out.
Or looking up.
I'm out. I am totally out. Varla, you hold on. We're going to go to our final break of the night here. Varla Ventura is our guest, author extraordinaire. She has a plethora of books out on Amazon, talking everything from mermaids to sirens, banshees, vampires, werewolves, fairies, pukas. VarlaVentura.net is her website. VarlaVentura.net. Make sure you check it on out. We got her for another half hour before we go to the news of the night with Everett Themer. We'll be back with more Spaced Out Radio right after this.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
From the mile-high state of Colorado, sharing our signal around the world, I invite you to Spaced Out Sundays. Hi, I'm Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm closing out the week by taking you on a paranormal journey to the world of the weird. Ghosts, aliens, psychic phenomena, I will hit it all in your questions too. So let us highlight the paranormal for you. So come join me for Spaced Out Sundays starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the show, our Keith Andrews is back for another edition of the ET Connection. It all starts at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. Hello to everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network and Deep Talk Radio. Don't forget, all of our archives are free on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Hamadryad. Hamadryad is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. For the final time tonight, we introduce our guest, Varla Ventura. She is an author of everything strange and weird. Tonight we had been talking about mermaids, but because the audience requested it in the chat rooms, we're going to get into trolls and gnomes now. Varla's website is varlaventura.net. That's varlaventura.net. Varla, welcome back.
Thank you.
We're going to bring you back. Go ahead.
I'm going to try and cure you of being afraid of gnomes. Or did your friend already do that?
No. Well, it kind of put the more fear in me that I'm doing it wrong. You know, I'm doing it wrong.
Let them hear you admit that you're afraid. Rule number 1.
Well, we're going to bring you back in December because you have so many awesome topics that we can discuss. I think we need to do that.
Yes, like the Scandinavian Christmas troll and other things of that nature. That'll be delightful. Perfect time to talk about it.
Let's do it. We'll arrange a date. I know a couple of our listeners out there are going to be extremely happy. I already got ripped by one of our listeners, Tripster, who says, I can't believe that it's been 3.5 years and you haven't had Varla on the show yet. Shame on you, Dave. Shame on you. So,
well,
that just works.
We evolve. So
exactly.
You never know. Things
I'm
come
one
up.
with the gnomes. I am one with the gnomes. All right.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I know you're asking all the questions, but I just have to know, is it the fact that their eyes follow you when you walk past them? Is that
no, not at all.
Is that what makes you afraid of the gnomes?
No.
Okay.
I've told this story before, so I have no problem telling you this story. I lived in a basement suite near my daughter after my ex-wife and I split up. And my landlords had garden gnomes. And in order to enter my house, I had to walk past the garden gnome garden and then go to the back of the house to enter my suite. And my daughter's room was on the side of the house, and there was a street light that would kind of shine into the backyard. And for a couple weeks, she started waking up in the middle of the night. She was about, I'm going to say 8, 9, maybe 10, no, not 10, about 7, 8, 9 years old at that point. And she would start waking up to tapping on her window. And it would freak her out. And then one day she had her blinds open and she actually saw the top hat and the shadow of a gnome running away after tapping on the window. And that just gave me the heebie-jeebies. And ever since then, I just never trusted them. It scared me. I've been within 100 feet of 2 Bigfoot. I've been face to face with aliens. All right. I've seen a wood nymph. Okay. There's a few fears that I have. All right. I'm going to work on the garden gnome one, because right now It ranks up
I
there.
can see. Well, but the fear stems from the fact that this thing frightened your daughter, and there's that protective instinct. It's hard to let go of that because your initial. You walked by them probably a bunch of times and didn't think, well, whatever. These people have these tacky gnomes. You didn't think too much of it, but for the fact that you felt that something was threatening your daughter probably just elevated that fear, and now you associate it with all gnomes.
Totally gave me the heebie-jeebies.
That's very typical of a gnome or anything that is in the realm of the fairy to be mischievous like that, and also to try and communicate with children in that way, in a way that might be perceived as frightening. And I've actually had a lot of people, after talking about fairies and things like that, and I discovered myself reading about fairies and some of the things that certain, slightly more vengeful fairies would do, scratches and hiding things and destroying things and, thrashing the room. It started sounding very similar to some accounts I had heard of poltergeists, alien encounters, and, sort of like fairy kidnappings. I'm not saying alien encounters or poltergeists don't exist, but sometimes I think there are other things that could be happening that we just attribute to this only category that we know. And when you get into the kingdom of fairy, you realize that there are all of these different facets, and that something like, oh, the happy little leprechaun it's not what you think it is. That's, it's actually this like grumpy little leprechaun that, doesn't really want to have anything to do with you. And you just keep harassing him, trying to find this gold, which he doesn't even have. So, it's kind of, there are all these things at play in that way. But I do think that gnomes are traditionally there to protect nature and to protect the spirit of nature. And that is how they ended up in people's gardens. They're actually nature entities. So if you can reconcile with that and the idea that, maybe this gnome wasn't out to get her, but also, not too much into psychology here, but it was probably a very vulnerable time for both of you. So anything out of the ordinary probably seemed especially frightening. But maybe that gnome was just trying to say, hey, cute, there's a little girl here now. Like there didn't used to be a little girl here. I don't know.
Yeah. Still scares
me.
Still scares me. Okay, so what do I got to do to get over this fear? What do I got to do to get over this fear?
Can you make an offering? I bet your friend told you to do the same thing.
Yes,
to make an offering, because he did, right? Because this is the way that you handle fairies, especially domestic fairies. They will do many, many things to help and protect you, but not if you don't acknowledge them, if you take them for granted. For example, you have something like a hobgoblin or a goblin. They come by many different names: brownies, dobbies or dobies. That's sort of the Scottish version of a brownie, and brownie's the Welsh version. Hobgoblins are kind of more in like rural parts of England. And these are domestic fairies that will like clean your house and do all kinds of things for you. But if you expect it of them, or if you fail to leave that saucer of milk and that, lovely piece of bread for them, they'll upend everything and, sour your milk and, kill your cows, basically. So on that premise, making some kind of offering to that, like that elemental, that fairy spirit, leaving out a lovely, and by the way, it cannot be scraps. Everyone should know that cannot be leftovers. They know when it's leftovers. You can't just put half your pasta on a plate and stick it out in the garden. It doesn't work that way. You have to sort of consciously create something that is an offering. And in your case, it's a bit of a peace offering. Like, look, I don't like you. You don't like me. Let's just agree that we're not going to harass each other, that, we're going to, stay out of each other's paths. But to make some kind of offering, usually some sort of luscious cake and wine or milk or something like that does the trick.
Where do I put it?
Where's your nearest gnome? There's no gnome anywhere near you.
No. 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 So do I have to go? Do I have to go to my buddy Mark's house, steal one of his gnomes, and put it in the studio here?
Don't steal the gnome. Don't steal the gnome. Rule number 1: never steal a gnome. You could make an offering there to one of his gnomes. You could just make an offering in a garden, and it doesn't have to be a gnome there, but it might help you mentally to like look a gnome in the eye and say like, look, let's get over this. But it doesn't. It can just be an offering. It doesn't have to be directly to a gnome. Like obviously, if you're making an offering to something that you want to help you find lost things and clean your house, you're not going to be looking at that and saying, hey, here you go. You're going to have a little special place in your house, just like you would if you were, doing, an ofrenda on Dia de los Muertos or whatever. You're kind of creating this nice space with these lovely things and saying, it's a spell. It's essentially you're going to do a gnome spell.
Right.
Can you do this? Yes, you can do this. Anyone can do it. You just do what you think seems to make sense. Like if I were a gnome, what would I want to eat? And, maybe your daughter can put a little note in there. I know she's probably not 8 anymore, but still, she might be willing to put a little, hey, no hard feelings. I know you didn't mean to scare them. It's like spiders, right? People are so scared of spiders. A spider is way more scared of you or, way more worried that you're going to hurt it than, it can't do anything to you unless it's a black widow or, a brown recluse or something like that. But there's
either way, I'm supposed. Now, the story that David Weatherly told me was that he told this gentleman who was insulting the gnomes and all of a sudden came into a grandiose amount of bad luck. Everything from his car breaking down to hurting himself or whatever it was. He went back to the spot and he was somebody who used an Indonesian bowl, for where they stir it and the bowl makes noise. What do they call those?
Yeah.
I forget what they call
like
those bowls.
Like a meditation bowl, singing bowl.
Well, he brought a gold one. And the next thing he knows, as he has his eyes closed to meditate and kind of say what he needs to do to apologize to the gnomes, opens up his eyes, and out of the corner of his eye, he sees a gnome running off with his gold bowl. And he chased after the gnome, but he couldn't catch it. And the bowl never came back. So now he's upset that his gold bowl, very expensive bowl, disappeared to a gnome, and David's like, well, what do you expect? That's the payback. They don't get mad, they get even. They don't get mad, they get even. And that's the payback.
That's the least. Yeah, you got to give them something.
Yeah.
You've got to give them something. And this is recurring with also like leprechauns, for example. Instead of tying them up and torturing them and saying, tell me where your money is, you can leave out like some very luxurious velveteen or something like that in a, very vibrant color like red or blue. And they really like fabric. And so that might actually, coax them enough to share not necessarily the gold with you, but the wealth and the luck that would bring you more fortune.
Right.
So I think that gnomes can bring you a lot of fortune and can provide a lot of protection. And just getting all psychological on you again. I mean, it seems like if you're in a vulnerable place and your family dynamic has changed, your daughter is with you, you're in a new place, there's this tapping, it's freaky. But at the same time, from the gnome's point of view, it might be something like, hey, we're here. We're here too. We're gnomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, I don't have a problem with fairies.
Help your fear, but there are some really, really, really scary stories of fairies stealing children. Yeah. But it's not gnomes. Gnomes aren't the ones that are doing it. So
see, I don't have a problem with the fairies. Typically. I like the fairies. I think,
well, you might not after our next discussion about fairies. You might not be able to sleep.
You know what's very interesting is my stepdaughter. She attracts fairies. and she will actually go sit in our backyard or the green belt all by herself just to meditate, and she will be absolutely convinced that the fairies will literally, she'll open up her hands and they'll come land on her hands. Like she just has that connection.
You should probably involve her in the gnome peace offering then, because she might know instinctively what to do and where to put it. If you don't have a gnome, and you don't have to go steal your friend's gnome, but I think that gnomes get a little bit of a bad reputation, but they also get dismissed. You know, they're painted all these like ridiculous colors and put in these silly poses and stuff. And really, they are a guardian spirit, and they guard domestic gardens a lot, and were used to guard crops and make sure that they prospered and people didn't starve. So if you kind of shift your perspective of them being this like weird thing of, it might not have been the gnome that was tapping, but it sounds like it probably was. I can see that kind of creep factor of why that would freak you out. But traditionally, they are used in a way to protect and, kind of ensure that a family eats and survives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my stepdaughter, she's just absolutely incredible with these. And they haven't visited her in a while, but she is adamant that this is something that she is very, very cool with. Very cool with. It's odd.
Well, I think she's a great candidate for helping you reconcile your deep-seated fear of gnomes. Now, what about your daughter? Does she remember that incident, and is she afraid of gnomes?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because something might have actually been out to kind of like lure her into the garden at that point. Tap, tap.
Very
tap,
much
tap.
could have been.
Yes, and that's the fairy kingdom. I mean, we think of like the fairies as these like delightful little things that, flit about, but there are, under the kingdom of fairy, there are many, many other creatures by other names that are still considered part of the fair folk, who are, terrifying kidnappers, taking you on mad, wild rides in the night to the point of, reevaluating your whole life. I mean, they all kind of serve a purpose for what kind of encounter you have. But most of them actually, the deep, dark kingdom of fairy is quite frightening. And it's definitely not something to, enter into lightly. And that's not a caution towards your stepdaughter at all. I mean, I think that certain people have a gift, just like some people can see ghosts and some people can't. It's not something that you can just train yourself to be able to see fairies. You either can or you can't, or you sense them or you can't. You can be open to those things, and you can be welcoming, and you can be willing, and you can put up every little charm and chime and all those things. And it's the same thing applies to all the psychic arts. You got it or you don't.
Right.
Now, you can learn things. You can learn certain things, and you learn to read tarot cards, and you can learn to read people's faces, but you can't learn the whole combination. You're born with it or you're not. And that, that's not a critique. It's just a way of knowing when somebody's, authentic or not. And I think, fairies can sense that out very, very quickly, whether somebody's authentic or not.
BTO has a question for you. He is asking, what's the difference then between gnomes, trolls, goblins, and leprechauns?
So many different things. Those are all different. So they're all, just to go back again, so I initially, when I started working on books about magical creatures, when I thought of fairies, I thought of a few different things that generally had the idea that most people have, which is that fairies are fairies. They're like these little flowery things that have wings. And then trolls are trolls and goblins are goblins. But in fact, and especially, again, I lean toward the traditional Irish folklore because, that's where my roots are. And so I think I have this kind of leaning toward that. But that is like this big term, like the kingdom of fairy. It's like the kingdom of fungi. You know, it's like this huge term that's used to describe all of these different types of fairies. And so within that kingdom, you have something like a leprechaun, which I learned a lot about leprechauns writing the book. I often thought, and like everyone, I just thought of leprechauns as this, like, you know, bowler wearing little guy that was, you know, 3 feet tall and had a big sack of gold or a stash of gold somewhere. It's not at the end of the rainbow, I'll tell you that much. That idea is because you never can get to the end of the rainbow. In other words, finding a leprechaun's gold is an elusive and fruitless task that is put towards somebody who is trying to take the easy way out by capturing a leprechaun versus hard work. So there's, you know, an allegory in there, I guess. But you've got leprechauns. They're the cobblers of the fairy kingdom. Everybody has their own sort of role. You've got trolls, which are often seen dwelling under bridges, but not in a menacing way, in a protective way, in a making sure that bridges don't collapse and that people make it over properly. But they are also associated with caves and being deep underground. You have something like a dwarf, which is also associated with being deep underground, but you also have like Tommyknockers and hobgoblins, sometimes seen in mines. Then you have crossovers. You have the word goblin, which is also coblin in Welsh, which leads back to the fairy cobbler, which is the leprechaun. But then that term can also be applied to some very frightening things. In certain cultures, goblins are very terrifying. In my book, I include a very scary goblin story that was retold by a woman who married a Japanese man, and they lived in Japan in the Victorian era. And she started writing kind of the way the Grimm brothers did. She started collecting all these Japanese folk tales, and she tells this very frightening goblin story. But there are also instances of goblins being much more like the domestic goblins or hobgoblins or brownies, which live with us and, you know, help clean our house and mind the children and things like that. So it's like any word in any language, there are all these variations. And so the kingdom of fairy is very complex, very interwoven, and very, very deep.
We only got about 3.5 minutes left with you. This has just flown on by tonight. Completely flown on by. Do you think I'm going to be safe? Do you think I'm going to be safe?
I do. I'm a little worried about you now, though, because I feel that you really are genuinely afraid of these gnomes, and I don't know. Like, definitely, I think you need to like put a little like dish of fine candy out or something. Just, you got a garden space, you know, stick a little something out there and just say, "Look, guys,
I got a bunch
like
of snow.
You don't
right
like
now.
me."
I got a bunch of snow.
Right,
That's what I have.
Okay, then you can. Yeah, gnomes are. Yeah, they might be around in the snow, and some. I mean, you know, you might have a very specific type of gnome or sort of troll-like creature up there. I'll have to do a little more research before we talk again, because there are some northern troll / gnomey type things that they look like a gnome. They have a pointed hat like what we think of as a gnome, like a garden gnome, but they aren't necessarily a gnome by nature. So I'll have to do a little more research into what's going on in that part of the world. But I have some ideas from what I've read of like Scandinavian trolls, and so I think there's probably some crossover there.
Wonderful. I'm very much looking forward to that as I roll my eyes at you now.
I hope you can sleep.
Yeah.
No, come on. It's just a little gnome. You got this.
Oh, I know. I totally know. I totally know where you're going with that. But I just kind of, I don't know. I got to get over it. I have no choice.
Yeah, I can see. You know what? When it comes to something like potentially hurting or scaring somebody close to you, a member of your family, your own child, all bets are off. And I think we can all relate to that. And I can relate to that too. It's like, yeah, all bets are off. I really don't care what you think you're offering me. I'm just gonna,
I hear you.
Drive this knife between
it.
your eyes or whatever. Yeah.
I am
whatever
feeling
it takes.
Varla, we're going to bring you on next month. Talk about Christmas trolls.
All right.
Or pardon me, not next month. We're going to bring you on in December. We're going to bring you on.
Yeah, great.
Talking Christmas
that sounds
trolls.
Great.
That'll be fun.
Yes, Christmas trolls and different odd fairies of holiday tradition, and also I know some weird things associated more with witchcraft. What we might associate with witchcraft today that were traditionally part of Christmas. So
very true. That's going to be so much fun. Could you do me a favor? Let everybody know where they could find your books, your website, and so on and so forth.
Yes, it's varlaventura.net, and I have links to my books on there. My books are all in print and widely available. You can find them on the interwebs, on Amazon, BNN. You guys still have BNN up in Canada, right? Barnes and Noble. I think at least
somewhere.
The website version.
Somewhere.
You got Amazon, IndieBound, all the local bookstores. I know that we have a Canadian distributor because I've had a couple of people in Canada order the book and say that they got it very quickly. So the books are widely available, varlaventura.net. And I thank you so much for having me on and for a wonderful, wonderful chat.
Well, we love having you here, and we're going to do it all again very, very soon. Thank you so much for coming on Spaced Out Radio.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night. Coming up next, as you hear the music, we have Mr. Everett Themer and the Encounter coming on up.
We come to play the final scene. The curtains closing in the darkness we expose what lies beneath. You thought I needed someone to be complete, but you were wrong. Oh, so wrong.
We are entering the Encounter tonight with the president of Team Stump, Mr. Everett Themer, our intrepid news director for the SOR Encounter, which can be found at spacedoutradio.com, clicking on the news section. We got great stories up there right now, courtesy of our main writer, Captain Gail Shark. President of Team Stump, Everett Themer. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Fantastic. What a good show. What a great interview Varla is.
That was, I kind of got turned off on the whole mermaid thing years ago when Discovery Communications kind of introduced a wing that created these mockumentaries. And they had a couple out. I believe one was called Mermaids, The New Evidence. And they promoted them as documentaries, and you'd watch it and you'd think it was real, only to find out it was all fake. And when those came out, that kind of turned me off on the whole mermaid thing. But listening to some of the information she had and some of the stuff that she shared, there's a whole big part of this planet that's undiscovered and unexplored. And I want to go back and take a little look at that.
Do you think they exist?
I'm open to the possibility. Offhand, just right off the top of my head, I would say probably not, to almost a definitive no, but I'm open to having my mind changed.
I think this is one of those situations that I want to believe. You know what I'm saying? I want to believe. I want to be able to say, when you're going out at sea, even if you're on like a ferry traveling between islands or something like that, and be looking out into the ocean and see mermaids. I think that would be kind of cool. I want to believe, man.
So do I. I would love to. I'd love to see one. I'd love to find one. I'd love for somebody to find some form of evidence, just to at least propel the argument forward a little bit.
My gosh. I'm scrolling through my Facebook page in the news section here that I have. Talk about coincidence. Report out of the... I know I don't really believe this site. Report out of the World News Daily Report.com. Irish farmer claims he was sexually assaulted by a leprechaun. I'm going to have to ask Varla about that. Come on.
You know that site is blatantly fake news.
Totally.
Oh, I can't believe you're even looking at that.
I know. It's in my news feed.
Hey, before we get too far, I need you to do me a favor.
Sure.
Because we're all about getting to the truth and finding things out. And I have a hypothesis I want to test. So I'm going to send you $20 American.
Okay.
And in return, would you do me the favor of going out after the show tonight and stealing a gnome?
No.
I just want to see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to be your guinea pig for this, man. I'm not going to be your guinea pig. That's what you have a son for.
It's in the name of science.
I understand this, but I am not going to be your guinea pig.
$20 American. What is that in Canadian? Like,
about $3,000. About $3,000.
Okay, well, the offer's out there.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm trying to become one with the gnomes, and therefore I cannot faithfully do this. I cannot.
All right. We'll let you pass on this one, but then you have to agree with me that when the guest said that being afraid of spiders was irrational and that they're more afraid of us than we are of them, I'm not testing it. That's entirely untrue.
I am so not testing it out, man. So not testing it out. Right?
Well, I tried.
No, I gotta solve this fear. I would sooner solve the fear of garden gnomes than I would the one of cotton balls or styrofoam. Both those things are just pure hideous and evil.
Why do you say that?
Oh, the feeling of them? Oh. I'm getting the shivers right now just thinking of, you know, when styrofoam like rubs together or rubs on something, it makes that high-pitched sound. That just drives me nuts. Just drives me nuts.
I don't know. I rather enjoy the sound of cracking styrofoam.
No. Oh, disgusting. Disgusting stuff. Should be banned. Bad for the environment, too. Let's get rid of it.
Okay. How about we get into the news?
Let's do it.
I know that you are a big liver of the hip-hop lifestyle.
I am.
And
I am.
Quite a bit of news came out of the music industry today with the hip-hop imagery. And one, yeah, Suge Knight Sr. was sentenced to 28 years in prison for a hit-and-run accident that caused the death of a young man. And as that was happening, his son, Suge Knight Jr., came out and basically kind of hinted and made some claims that Tupac Shakur is still alive and living in Malaysia.
Well, there's two different stories here. Hold on a second. Suge Knight, and people who have heard Ian Holt on this show, they know that he is very much involved in the hip-hop scene, more on East Coast, but he knows all about the West Coast stuff. And he said that, like, Suge Knight is not a good man. Not a good man.
No, Suge Knight is one of the ones that, was it Eminem, where they basically held him over a balcony railing at a hotel and threatened to kill him? It was, I believe it was Eminem that they did that to.
I don't know.
Years ago. But yeah, he lives that hip hop lifestyle to the fullest. And he is I guess you would say, kind of a dangerous guy.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go there. Would not want to go there at all. I mean, The guy, how long did he get for his jail term?
28 years.
Yeah, his hip-hop career is over.
Well, he's already been in jail for this event about 3 years. So he's been out of the game for a little bit. But, you know, he was in prison before that and managed to come out and get back involved in the industry. But this time, I think at 28 years, when he gets out, even with the good behavior and parole and things like that, it'll be time for him to step aside. And it looks like his son, Suge Knight Jr., is starting to play the publicity game and step up and fill that void.
Well, you know what it is? I mean, with Suge Knight, and I don't know much about hip-hop, but Suge Knight's name comes up so often when it comes to bad stuff towards other people. And here is a guy who literally, on the West Coast, has the hip-hop world at his fingertips. More money than most people in this planet, or on this planet, could even imagine or wish for, or work their tails off for in an entire lifetime. And this guy just rolls around like his crap doesn't stink and thinks that he owns the planet. It's terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Well, I'm not going to judge the hip hop lifestyle or anything like that, but you know, there is a particular mindset that comes out of that kind of upbringing and that kind of lifestyle.
True.
But you know, his son, and this is where it gets confusing, because Suge Knight Sr. has said that he knows who killed Tupac, but he won't say who it was. And now his son has come out and said that Tupac Shakur is living in Malaysia, and he's just living it up large down there, out of the spotlight. He says that Tupac did this because he was in danger of the Illuminati, of course.
Right.
And that, you know, he's not outing him. He's not giving up any of Shakur's secrets, but he's, you know, now he's in danger. So I'm not sure exactly why, if this were true, he would be doing it. But when you put all these pieces together, it does sound like a little bit of a marketing ploy to me. Because I see in the next, maybe 6 months to a year, another album coming out. I believe somewhere I heard that Shakur had hundreds of songs either recorded and ready or in the process of being completed, which they could then mix and add some samples to and complete and release as an album. This may be a good way to generate some publicity for that, and it wouldn't surprise me if we saw one in the next 6 months to a year.
Well, the funny part about it was, I mean, Suge Knight was in the car, and he was the actual target the night Tupac Shakur was killed in Las Vegas, right on the Las Vegas Boulevard. And the fact that, you know, the Machiavelli albums came out, and they still believe that Tupac was alive, or some people believed he was alive. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there, man. And this is one of those music conspiracy theories that just will not go away.
It won't. And it's funny that, well, I shouldn't say funny, but, you know, here again, and a lot of times we talk about it in rock music, but here again, you have the conspiracy, the Illuminati or some sort of secret society being pulled in. And as soon as you bring in some form of secret society like that, my mind at least goes right to the idea that if that's the case, if that were true, that's kind of implying that once again, here is a musician or an artist that knows something the general public doesn't know. And I'm not saying I believe this. In fact, the Knight Jr. actually had to post on, I believe it was Instagram, that he had to post a photo saying, "I am not on drugs," because he was getting so much backlash from this. But it just seems to be a continual pattern. And it's one of those things that I think at some point we're going to have to explore again.
No kidding. Let's move on to story number 2.
Oh, we're going to fire up those conspiracy theorists. Guess what DARPA is working on?
Gnomes?
No. They are working on a way to have insects genetically modify crops, farm fields, plants out in the field once they're planted and growing. Their idea is to modify these genes in these bugs or flies that will then go to or, attack, bite. How they'll do it various ways. The crops to cause them to genetically modify. And there are some fears that the world could look at this as the next step in our bioweapons sort of arsenal.
Of course.
And there's some questioning that really DARPA is working on something in the agricultural field. And what they're saying is that they consider our food sources and our foodstuffs and our crops vital to national security. So they are working on these tests. And they claim it is not at all militaristic.
No.
But yet here they are, a research agency under the military.
At some point, and I think there's two trains of thought here. At some point, we have to get the word out of military and food. Let's just separate those for a second, okay?
Let's think?
Just separate that. And you think we would have learned by the carp or certain snakes or certain birds that introducing evasive species does not work. Let's talk about the snakehead. Let's talk about the carp that is causing havoc to fish stock all across Canada and the United States. Snakeheads more so in the United States than Canada because it's too cold up here for them. But these evasive species are a little ridiculous. We're always trying to introduce these flies or these mosquitoes or anything to try and take care of one problem, right? At one point, they brought the pine beetle over to North America because there was another insect that was infesting all of the trees, and the pine beetle was known to feed off of them. Well, guess what? The pine beetle killed all the trees.
Well, there's just something conspiratorial, a little frightening about the idea of this. I mean, we already have bug-borne and mosquito-borne illnesses that are being transmitted that we have to worry about that we really didn't worry about, 30, 40 years ago?
I know.
Now we're engineering insects specifically to carry viruses even if we do it under the cover of, then they can introduce this virus to a soybean field to protect it from root rot or cutworm or one of those things. How long until, even if DARPA did this solely out of agricultural research, how long until this gets mutated or changed into we're introducing mosquitoes or beetles or, forbid, spiders that are carrying something horrendous that's dangerous?
Because West Nile in mosquitoes just isn't dangerous enough.
I live in constant fear of West Nile.
I think we all do. It's terrible.
And you have to be. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, how can you control how many mosquitoes you get bit by? Even if you spray yourself and you go outside, it only takes one. Or Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Remember when Lyme disease wasn't a thing?
Yeah. Or kids being allergic to peanut butter. Now you can't bring peanut butter into a school.
Down here, you can't even make homemade baked goods. Like if your kid's having a birthday or something like that, it has to be store bought, and it has to be all these different, this free and that free, and it's kind of, well, it's a new use for the styrofoam we were talking about earlier.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about, man. Where did all these come from? I mean, peanut butter. I have never seen so many peanut butter allergies in my life. And when I was in school, there was nobody, you never heard of a peanut butter allergy.
And how many kids at that table at lunchtime had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
Oh, it's still one of my favorites. Peanut butter and honey, still one of my favorites.
When my son was in school, they weren't allowed to have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You couldn't make that for their lunch.
No, same as my kids, man. Same as my kids. Cannot bring peanut butter anywhere near the school.
Well, soon that's not going to matter once DARPA gets these virus-infected flies flying around.
Go figure. Go figure.
That won't.
Actually, this is kind of sad, but one of the kids in my son's school, I saw a note on it. There's this one little girl in my son's school, and she's new to the school. She has an allergy to the sun.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. A poor thing.
Well, you guys live up there. You don't get much sun anyway.
Oh, yeah, we do, dude. We get a ton of sun up here because the clouds dissipate real quick up here usually.
I couldn't imagine living with that.
Yeah. Could you imagine?
I could not.
Me either. Either way, it's weird. Let's get to the next story.
Vladimir Putin's annual calendar came out today.
Oh, I know a few people who will like that.
Oh, I want to get one of those. And of course, there's some shots of him in there wearing no shirt. There's some shots in there of him cuddling with some animals and doing some fishing. And it's actually a really popular calendar. And I imagine that's probably because the people of Russia want to have one, hanging up so they can show their support for him. But, he's famous for his, what would you call them? Masculine shots of him.
Yes. Very masculine shots.
Bare chested I've seen him by horses, holding guns. This one, he's even got some James Bond-like photos in.
Yeah. There's a man, do you think Vladimir Putin carries around a mirror just so he can look at himself? I bet you he does.
If you look at him and you look at some of the old, 1920s Nosferatu movies and stuff, I'm not sure he shows up in a mirror.
I don't know. I really don't know.
He does kind of have that look.
He does. I mean, I don't think there is a more intimidating man on this planet than Vladimir Putin.
And he's trying to bring back the old school espionage.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of.
Well, you got to respect him for that. You got to respect him for that.
And
let's get back to some good old fashioned espionage killings.
Oh, remember the good old days of the Cold War in the 80s when we didn't have to worry about virus-infected flies and Vladimir Putin and all these weird things.
Yeah, where you had to make sure that nobody dropped anything on your food in case it was sprayed with poison. Oh, the good old days. I know. On that note, let's get to the thought of the day, shall we?
Fantastic.
I know you're going to get a Putin calendar. Totally know that.
Of course I am.
I know. That's why I'm bringing it up. Thought of the day. Go ahead, Ev. What was that?
I'm going to hang that up with pride.
Oh, of course. Thought of the Day happens every night at this time, where we ask you a question on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and then we read your responses aloud on the show. So today's Thought of the Day is, what are your thoughts on the existence of mermaids throughout history to today? Let's get to them, shall we? Angie says, every legend has a grain of truth. Everett, I would totally believe in that one.
Oh, I would agree. And I think there are stories of some monster-like things that have been seen out there that weren't mermaids necessarily, but that certainly could have influenced the story.
I would fully agree with you. People are seeing something. We don't know what it is. Matthew says, I don't think they're the result of horny sailors seeing manatees, but merman is a thing. And he posts the merman portion of Zoolander, one of the greatest movies of all time. Love that movie. Zoolander 2, not so impressive. Original Zoolander, classic. Classic. Tim states, too many things sailors in the past have seen. Fish with spears in them carry them out to sea. Beings caught in their nets, etc. Recently, sounds, noises, communications of unknown origin being recorded way out at sea. Most of the world is covered by oceans and still unexplored. Myths start in reality. Very interesting. Keith, I think it's fishy. Christine, sailors' overactive imaginations? Seamen. They're seamen. Stephen, anyone know what mermaids invented? No. The seashell cup bra? I don't know.
Wait, there's no answer?
No, he didn't put an answer in there. How dare he? Gil says, I don't believe they're real. Edie, not a believer, but I said that about Bigfoot 5 years ago, too. Gregory, we're supposed to be open-minded in this group, but the best I can come up with is this. There were a lot of lonely, horny sailors and dolphins having relations. Ew.
No.
Ew. Nina Marie says, since water cryptids are my field of research, I answered this and more in a different viewing. I'm going to try and bring her on the show. Jade? Someone I once knew was a fisherman in Newfoundland swears he saw one and said it was the ugliest thing he ever saw and never wanted to see one again. Well, that kind of ruins it. Kat says it's folklore. Uncle Dale, who posted a great picture of his mustache, the Power Stash, as we've nicknamed it, in the SOR Space Travelers.
I love that stash.
Oh, it's fantastic. Did you see the picture?
I haven't seen the picture yet.
Just scroll up. It's a beautiful piece of art. Really is. Should be framed. He says merfolk would be warm-blooded mammals, right? All the aquatic mammals that I know of are mostly blubber and tough skin, which sounds much different than the Disney pictures. Stunak says, sounds fishy to me. Kevin, mermaids have existed and flourished throughout time along with human evolution. They are our marine cousins and our backups. Their numbers have dropped severely since the late 40s and 50s when Walt Disney had them fished almost into extinction trying to open an exhibit at his new theme park. But he was unable to keep them alive in captivity, and he kept their existence a secret in shame of his slaughtering of them would destroy his empire. Really?
Somebody gave that a lot of thought.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The final one of the night goes to your favorite and mine, Mr. A-Hole Skeptic on Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio. Says, I'm pretty sure the sailors invented mermaids to explain where their crabs came from. Where their crabs came from. My goodness. That's always a good place to wrap it up, Mr. Everett Themer. Tell us where we can find the encounter.
You can find the encounter at spacedoutradio.com under the news tab or on Facebook at facebook.com/SOR the encounter online.
See, that's why I didn't read that one at the beginning, because we would have never made it through. Never made it through. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Skeptic. Always appreciate your work, and I'm humbled by it each and every night. Thank you, Varla Ventura, for coming on, talking mermaids and how to protect Dave from gnomes. We're going to bring Varla back on in December. We're going to talk some other stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. Also, tomorrow night on the program, Our Keith Andrews is back. We're getting into peak woo tomorrow night with the ET Connection. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern at spacedoutradio.com. Where the crabs came from. Okay. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at home, in your cars, at work, wherever you may be. A big thank you to everybody participating on Spreaker in a great chat room tonight. Your questions were fantastic. Everybody on Rev Radio, the Veterans Club, the SOR Space Travelers on Facebook, and on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Thanks for joining us every night. Thanks for telling your friends, doing your part to make us bigger and better every single night. Because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Good night, everyone.